going on, everybody? Lawrence Henderson back with another Hot Takes episode, and I'm excited to have another humble, open, and transparent conversation with an amazing coach, an amazing leader, Dr. Joel Pérez. What's going on, sir?
It's a good day. I mean, it's beautiful here in Los Angeles. The sun is out. It's going to be in the low 70s, just the right temperature to enjoy the sun. And yeah, it's a great day, and looking forward to today. And it's been a great season.
Man, you know what? It's man, how long have we known each other at this point, Joel?
I want to say it's been probably about 4 years, I
Okay.
think. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds about right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and y'all, you all know I love to share this space with amazing leaders that are able to have this conversation, not just because they researched it or study it, but because they're practitioners of the work that they do, and so we can have in-depth conversations. But I know Coach Joe, and you heard me call him Coach,
Mm-hmm.
through the amazing organization Academy of Creative Coaching, and Dr. Pamela Lard and the team over there who bring amazing group of leaders together to train up and mentor the next generation of amazing coaches serving the world. But today, Coach Joe, I'm excited. We're coming to talk about your book, Dear
Yes.
White Leader: How to Achieve Organizational Excellence Through Cultural Humility. And Coach, before we get rolling, I just got to know, in this season, with the way that all the things are happening in the world,
Mm-hmm.
what makes this the book and the work that you're leaning into?
Yeah, that's a great question. People generally will ask me, why did I write the book, or what prompted me? And a lot of it was uh, the work I was doing with my clients, white clients who were trying to lead exceptionally in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And as I started coaching and then added consulting to my practice, I realized that this book at this time, or this time was a good time to write this book, because I feel like, I mean, I talk about in the book that we are at a moment in our history, in our country, that demands leaders to lead well. I say lead exceptionally in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so that's really what prompted me to write the book. And the book is not a general how to dry kind of book. It is, I weave in my own journey of developing a posture of cultural humility, as well as stories from my clients and the organizations that I've worked with, as well as pulling, examples from different organizations that have experienced some challenges in the way they've shown up in this work. And so we are in a time in our history where we're very polarized. And so I talk about how this posture of cultural humility can help you navigate the complexity that comes with leading DEIB efforts, so that you can be the exceptional leader you want to be.
I love I love the idea of this being a posture. And it's funny, I describe, when people ask me what we do, I describe it as we do disposition work.
Mm,
We're the dirty jobs of leadership and professional development, and leaning into this. And when you think about the posture to do this work, where do you think a lot of organizations maybe didn't have the optimal foundation? And maybe it's posture, maybe it's a combination of things
mhm.
that led you to, again, need to put this work out into the world?
Yeah, in my experience, organizations generally are well-meaning, um, but don't know how to do the work. And so they end up making, as you and I know or have been reported, a lot of performative statements that don't lead to any action. They're just statements. So in the book, I share an example of an organization that really wanted to move from performative statements to action. I think the other thing organizations struggle with is they try to do this work and they do a lot of things, but busyness does not lead to organizational change, right? And so they get caught up in, let's start this, let's do this, let's hire this person. But the reality is, if you don't have a framework to guide you, then you end up doing a lot of work that you cannot show that it's actually having an impact on your organization. So in the book, I present a model for change, organizational change, in the work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So to your question, I think organizations just struggle with not knowing what to do or how to do it. It's still important that they do something, but the reality is that just doing something doesn't lead to sustaining the change that needs to happen in an organization in order to create an inclusive organization with a deep sense of belonging, that a lot of organizations talk about wanting to do, and they end up just faltering, or they end up spending a lot of money, but then at the end of the day, they don't have anything to show for the work that they did.
I think you just alley-ooped yourself into the next one, because I just saw an article where it was talking about how, practitioners of diversity, equity, inclusion work are now having to mask and massage, and it's almost rebrand and reface,
Mhm.
similar to kind of HR now being chief people officers and all the rest of these, or culture chief culture, or whatever the things are. Like, there's this mask, right? And it being under the umbrella to make even the terms untriggering and palatable for these organizations. But this article, what it pointed to was the stark reality that organizations were trying to do this work, and they were running into the wall of their actual appetite for full inclusion
Mm.
in
Mm.
this work. And so when you think about, how does cultural humility truly get people over the hump of that performative diversity stuff and really truly lean into work?
Well, in the book, so I will have to say the term itself is not my term. Two researchers developed it in the late 1990s, working with healthcare professionals. I am building on it to connect it with organizational leadership, organizational change. So, to your question, it starts with you, the leader. I always end any presentation I do with, it starts with you, right? It has to start with you, but it doesn't end there. And so in the book, I share a story of meeting with my doctoral advisor, my longtime mentor. And I told her, hey, at that point, I was developing a course that's online. I'm moving from cultural competency to cultural humility. And she looked at me and she said, that's great, Joel, but it has to be more than you, the individual. And I was shocked to hear that from her. And Dr. Daryl G. Smith is her name. And she's very good about kicking your butt when your butt needs to be kicked, and points out things. And she's one of those people that when you walk out of the room in the meeting, you're like, did she just chew me out? But I didn't know she just chewed me out. And so when she said that, it caused me to reflect and realize it is you. It starts with you, the individual. Um, but it has to lead to change, organizational change. So, so starting with you is the most important thing, the self-awareness, self-critique piece. But then it moves into looking at the organizational structure that historically has excluded people, particularly because organizations were not created or developed for BIPOC or other minoritized communities. And as you begin to develop your self-awareness, I also talk about developing other awareness. You begin to hear people's stories, people on your team, how they're experiencing the organization, or you're looking at the data, right? And it's showing that there's some huge gaps. You're losing talent from particular groups, and you want to do something about it. And that requires redressing the power imbalances, right, that you need to do. And that's the second aspect of cultural humility or characteristics. And ultimately, it needs to lead to systemic organizational change, where you start changing the ethos of the organization in order to be more inclusive, to have that sense of belonging, so that people want to stay in your organization. We know McKinsey's done a lot of research, Gallup's done a lot of research. It is more expensive to replace talent than to hold on to your talent, right? And so you as the leader, the organizational leader, need to do everything possible to create, or should do everything possible to create the inclusion you want to create, so your team feels like they can be in your organization and want to stay. But it starts with you, and that's the most important thing. And that's the hardest part because, as you know, self-awareness is a tricky thing. People don't like it, right? Um, I am now over 50, so AARP is mailing me stuff. I don't like to consider myself old, but the reality is I'm getting older, right? I used to have a lot more hair than I do now. That always wasn't a pleasant thing to see in the mirror, but I had to get used to it and own it. It is who I am. My hearing's not great. My kids remind me about my hearing, right? And that was a self-awareness piece for me. And where my kids were like, Dad, it's time. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could do this. But it was, the reality is, no, I got to do it. And when you're a leader, I think self-awareness is a key aspect of leadership. That's the hardest thing because we don't like looking at ourselves in the mirror and realizing that we need to change. And that's the key piece with cultural humility, is it starts with you, but it doesn't end with you.
Yeah.
It's got to move out of that.
No, and I would even say, just thinking about myself as you were just describing that, and of course, yeah. And again, they got T-shirts out there, like you got, I even say, little anecdotal things that you lead from the inside out, and all these other things. But if I'm being honest, right, and just being humble, open, and transparent about it,
Mm-hmm.
I have done it in boxes. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've been self-aware and allowed myself and others permission to kind of, just like you had that mentor kicking your butt, you
Mm-hmm.
gave her permission to kick your butt. But if the thinking around just the title in and of itself, if again, and me and you've done hundreds of trainings where we ask people like, who in here is self-aware, and not 100% of the room raises their hand,
Uh,
right?
yeah.
But when you throw out a term like dear white leader,
Mm-hmm.
how do you get them out of their own head and introduce them to the mirror? And I know coach, and again, it's a coach thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you hold that mirror up to them to begin getting them to do their work, because it does start with leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as you know, as people who write books, you need to have a target audience, right? You just can't write a book for everybody because then no one's going to buy it. And in my work, the work that I was doing around cultural humility was with white leaders who were really struggling because they wanted to get better but didn't know where to start. So this book is for white leaders who are struggling. They feel stuck. They're leading diverse teams. I just had a conversation with someone a couple weeks ago when I was in North Carolina, and he came up to me and he said, I did a cultural humility workshop. And he came up to me and said, Joel, this is really great. It really resonated with me because last year, I had all my direct reports were people of color. And I was having a hard time. He's like, I think I did a good job, but I think I could have done better if I would have been more aware of how I show up as a white leader. So that's where the pain point is for people who want to pick up this book. Yes, it's a provocative title, which will get people to want to at least look on the inside, maybe read the back cover. But it is for people that want to start, who feel stuck. And it's also for people who are afraid to ask questions in their places of employment, particularly white folk who are afraid to ask a question, even though they know they should before they make a mistake. But there's so much fear, right, around this idea of a cancel culture, if you want to call it that. I'm not saying there doesn't need to be accountability when people really screw up, but people are really fearful, particularly those that have questions, that are curious and they want to get better and they just don't know where to go. And that's where the book comes in, is it provides a roadmap, a guide, to help people get better at this work, who are afraid to ask questions and don't know where to start. And in this case, it's the white leader. And there are a lot of white leaders out there who have a real true desire to get better, but are struggling. And so that's where that's where I come in. So when the book comes out, I'll be launching a coaching program to go along with the book, particularly for white leaders that want to get better. And so that's a touch point. And I talk about the self-awareness piece, getting really clear about your cultural self-awareness, which means also acknowledging your bias, right? I also share how I have a bias, my biases have been pointed out to me along my career. Even as a man of color, I still mess up. I have biases that I need to keep in check, so it mitigates their impact. They won't ever go away, but I've developed things to help me to be better so they don't trip me up and cause some things. I also commit microaggressions or identity-based aggressions, as some folks are calling them now, where I mess up. And there's a process that I go through in how I apologize without making it about me, but apologizing and making it about the other person that I committed the microaggression against. So those are the things that I talk about in the book on the self-awareness, the internal piece, the me leader piece.
That's huge. You just hit a major point of emphasis. One, not only a practitioner of the work creating spaces, but drinking your own Kool-Aid
Yeah.
and being able, and because a lot of time, as you were talking about it, the awareness is also this operational consciousness
Mm.
that you're explicitly leaning into what that potential fear actually is. And I love that story of that leader who came up to you, is understanding there was something about the way you delivered the message
Yes.
that made them feel safe enough to approach you. And
Mm.
that's the keys to it right there. Particularly if you're talking about full on organizational change. If
Yes.
all, and again, this is for the practitioners out there who are continuing to do this work, you have to be able, you can't just tell somebody this is a safe space and
Right.
then subsequently, like right after that, make it an unsafe space to be in
Right.
by calling people out. And again, and the discomfort is already happening.
Yeah.
But being able to be in a coaching environment where you're able to now sharpen that skill set, you're now able to hold the container of vulnerability and
Yes.
courage
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that you do things differently,
Right.
so that you're now Coach Joe, who is identifying your own cultural, aggressions and identity aggressions and all these things, but not, and again, and it not me being overly sympathetic and apologetic about it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's now me taking accountability and
Yes.
now moving forward. And now I'm accountable for doing it differently the next time that I engage. And I tell you, it was, we were at a leadership conference, and just something, again, just language that we've used over the years
Mm-hmm.
that we don't like, we like, nobody's ever stopped us. And I said out loud, powwow.
Mm. Mm.
Right. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and the funny, and here's, no one before this moment had ever stopped me. And
Mm.
even me didn't research it to like, and again, because, and in my mind, and what happened, Coach, on the back of my neck, hair stood up. And I was like, oh God, here we go, here we go. But I
Mm-hmm.
went in and I was about to make it about me.
Yeah.
And in that split second, took a breath, and I said, thank you for pointing that out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that five, and in the subsequent minutes after that, you said it, it's about others.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately went to Dr. Google and I looked up the phrase, and I was like, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, like, what did I do? And
Mm-hmm.
again, stop making it about you.
Right.
It's about the people that you're intending to serve and lead and model
Yes.
some things for. And it's that continuous improvement as a practice. And so as you think about just this next phase, this next season of leadership, what are a couple things outside of cultural humility and leaning into this work? What are some other things that you're seeing are going to be necessary for leaders to just get inside of their toolbox as they're trying to lead well?
Yeah, I talk about three things that are needed, and there are others, but I focus on three things that are necessary to move from cultural competency to cultural humility. And I would say the same for you as a leader. First is developing your growth mindset or having a growth mindset. So the work of Carol Dweck, right? And really leaning into this idea that you can learn something even in the midst of something that seems really hard, that may be initially causing you to just want to give up, right? So whether that's a bad performance review, whether that's committing a microaggression, whether that is your bias, your ugly bias is showing up, is what can I learn from this to grow? So having a growth mindset. Second is curiosity, developing your curiosity, and I mean deep curiosity. So, you and I are coaches, so we're trained to ask questions. And I think others can benefit from having that same type of training where they remain curious with seeking to understand versus seeking to convince, is how I talk about it in the book. And the third is deep listening. And because we know we work with clients to say they're good listeners, and we sometimes say we're good listeners, but we have a lot of work to do, right? We don't truly show up to listen. We show up to hear some things and then give our opinions. And we're not really listening. We're talking past each other. And in our moment in history, right, we have an election coming up. We have the Israeli-Palestinian war going on. What if we approach those conversations with a sense of deep curiosity, and we're able to listen well, so we're able to be fully present? My guess is we'll learn some things and we'll leave that conversation a better person than when we started it. And in the book, and when I do presentations, I talk about, I'm not saying you have to change the way what you believe or your values, but it's going in with a sense of curiosity and listening well, that we would be better leaving a conversation with a better understanding of where that other person is coming from, and being a better, our society would improve, our faith communities would improve, our volunteer organizations would improve, because we're authentically showing up to listen, asking questions, not to convince, not to have toxic curiosity or a curiosity with an agenda, but truly listen and be curious, that we would be better. So I would say those three things are essential, not just for developing cultural humility, but I think developing ourselves as leaders, and in every aspect of our leadership, at the dinner table, in our faith communities, in our, the volunteer organizations that we spend time with, the nonprofits we're involved in, we would be better at leading in those spaces.
I love that. I love that. And again, this is, as you were talking, I'm like, man, seek to understand. Seek to understand. I love that they
Mhm.
call out to not the toxic
Mhm.
curiosity, like, and
Mhm.
again, I'm waiting to respond and like
Yep.
gotcha type
Right.
type
Right.
of stuff, but really truly that active, engaged
Yes.
listening. That again, it's in coaching, we always say listen for what's not being said,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Because a lot of these conversations, like you said, evoke so much emotion. And again, whether it's and again, we used to didn't be allowed to talk about race, religion, politics in the worst workplace, and that's all that gets talked about these days in the
Right.
workplace.
Yep.
Outside
Mhm.
of Drake and Metro Boomin and Kendrick Lamar, but those things are triggering for people because again, there's a strong sense of belief
Yeah.
inside of these topics. But that three, coach, that you put out there, that's an
Yep.
amazing three. So
Yep.
I we could talk about this all day long, coach, but I want people to get this book. I want people to reach out to you for support, and I want that daggone coaching group to fill up fast. So how do people get a hold of all the information to get a hold of you?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for asking. So the first place is my website. So apoyocoaching.com. Apoyo stands for support for in Spanish. So APOYO coaching.com. The book will also have a website. So dearwhiteleader.com. On the book website, there'll be some additional resources. I have a cultural humility assessment that I've developed for people to self-assess themselves on a scale to see where they're at with cultural humility. I'm active on LinkedIn. We'll always be posting about 3 or 4 times a week, so you can catch me on LinkedIn. And the book drops June 4th. will be available initially on Amazon, and then we'll branch out. It'll be available on all versions, so hardcover, softcover, Kindle. And then in a few weeks after that, the goal is to get it up on Audible for those of us who love listening to books rather than sitting and reading. And it's an easy read. That's one thing I really work towards. An easy read in the sense of it's not a long book. I wrote it in a way that people can jump around from chapter to chapter depending on the area of interest. Because you and I know people don't always read books cover to cover. And so I wrote it. I was intentional about writing it that way, so it's easy, it's accessible to people. But yeah, that's how you find me. That's how you buy the book and reach out to me at info@dearwhiteleader.com for more information. And I'll get information up once that coaching program launches. And I'm also going to start a group coaching program as well as the individual coaching.
Absolutely awesome, Coach. And so, yeah, reach out to Coach Joel, an amazing leader in his own right. But please understand, he's on the West Coast. So if you want an
Yes.
actually engaged conversation, make sure you
Yes.
plan accordingly.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
No, my absolute pleasure, Coach. Well, it's been a absolute blast, and thank you again for lending your time, your gift, and again this resource of Dear White Leader. Again, how to achieve organizational excellence through cultural humility, y'all. And so that's our time today. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in live. But hashtag replay if you're catching the replay. And until next time, lead well, be well, and we will see you all soon.